And we enter into the slow section of the album. Synthetic Debris.
It was kind of inspired by a walk I had with my parents sometime last year, where my dad grew up in Mayville in Donegal. My mum grew up in the Bronx, bizarrely, but then moved to Carndonagh, which I imagine was quite the culture shock. But, you know, they met there and they kind of grew up there and stuff, and it was just really interesting. We walked from Mayville to Greencastle and back, just along the water. And, you know, they were talking about things like happened when they were growing up, or like, oh, this is different, oh, this used to be this, and oh, such and such happened there. And there was this real history. And I suppose if you've you know been or spent time in a show, and it like hasn't really changed an awful lot since I remember it as a kid in the 90s, going across for the weekend or whatever, football specials. Yeah, exactly. Which is kind of a shame as well. You know, it's a bit like underfunded and things. But I don't even know if they think it was, not that it was that big a deal, but it was just, you know, listening in a conversation and being inspired, you know, by a place that I love being in, but hearing any of the history of has always sort of inspired me. And I don't know, for whatever reason, even when we went to like in a show and went to Culdaff to like sort of retreat, it's always, I think, our idea of like, things are overwhelming, let's skip town. And then your family history is somewhat similar, and in that, you know, there's a certain connection to that part of the world, and we, I guess, poured a little bit of that into it. The next two songs in the album are kind of very respectful of sort of like, you know, our parents or our grandparents, or just sort of like things we've learned. And so these sort of two songs are kind of about listening to them more than about us sort of leading with something.
When we were writing this album, there was probably a few difficulties we went through with like, you know, like family loss and family illness, and like just that really makes you grow up in a way, and it really makes you want to respect where you've come from and like learn more about where you've come from and give a good bit of reverence with that. And anytime we were feeling really stressed or really burnt out, just really going back home and going back to those stories and that like background, right? Like we want to write an album, so we want to write all different genres and types. And, you know, slow songs are usually about like pining love affairs or something, and I just like really wanted to write something like wholesome and what we really, really care about. And we really do care about our family and that history and where we come from. And Donegal holds such a special place in our hearts. Like both of us grew up in Derry, and like Donegal is just like an extension of Derry, really. And it's just so bizarre to see how, it's very romantic and bizarre to see how forgotten about it is. You know, it's literally just all of these buildings and all of these stories, and they're just like, sometimes it just feels like they're fading away and being like taken over by the wild. And it's just so, it's such an interesting space to be in. I think it's so, there's something very, very special about that space. So this song's very heavily about Donegal and our past, and you came to me after that walk and was like, this is the angle for the slow song, and we're going to do it in 6/8. And we were like, great, let's do it. And so we really like explored all of those stories, and we were kind of like, if buildings could talk, because all these ruins that are falling apart, and like the shop fronts that are just like paintings of shop fronts now, which is just such a weird thing that people do.
I feel like no one's talking about this, but there's so many little towns, definitely in Ireland, that you go into, and the whole main street has just become like,
it's just a picture. It's not real anymore.
It's like, there's the butchers painted on, there's the chemist painted on, and it's really, I understand why they do it, and it's you know, I'm sure it's obviously not by choice that they do that, but it just becomes such a strange thing.
It just comes from a place of real care and love for that place and our background and where we come from and our families and that history, and just kind of the buildings and the places that remain that are so a part of your history, but you leave them, and that's kind of sad, you know. We weren't sure what to do with it as like an acoustic song, and it was a bit more acoustic-y, you know, in terms of like having like real drums and like more heavy guitars and stuff for a while, and it didn't quite feel right.
It was a bit more raw probably and wholesome. We recorded like the bones of it in the live room at the start together, which, you know, there's a baby grand piano there, we had a drummer, we had like you know, a Fender Twin, there was like real things happening. It was a bit more like that. But I think, even just the synthetic debris thing, I don't know, just it felt nicer to have sort of these sort of electronic instruments that are pretty much true to the things that we usually use to create emotion. It would feel weird to just totally change and do something that's very raw and wholesome, whereas like those, more electronic instruments are something that we harness to create emotion, so that they should be there as well. There is just a whomping, sense of dread on a move the whole time, going bop, 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 bop. And it's bizarre, but it's like you need that because it just gives it that tension.
And it's also looking back from our perspective in our world. So our world isn't folksy guitars and our world is cities and synths. So like it is kind of looking at it through that lens a bit. And I remember when we recorded the piano, we were like, probably be good to have some piano in here. So we recorded bits, and then you were like, should just play some notes and some chords and see what happens. There's like a full take of me just being like,
yeah, we'll put it through an Echoplex and distort it, it'll be fine.
Gling, which is what we did, and like reversed it, and that's kind of where that piano riff comes from. Is just like chopping it up afterwards and be like, yep, that works. Just random notes put together, and then the samples of the voices were just like old footage of like me and my brother. I think it was my 6th birthday party, and we were like on a treasure hunt or something, and my mum had a big birthday, and we dug out loads of old videos, and that kind of came up, and we were going through it, and we just thought it was a really nice fit, like because we were just running around on a treasure hunt, so we were reading clues aloud, and we're so English in it because I had just moved over from England at that point, which is why there's these 2 English children on there. It is me and my brother.
I love that like little bit of dialogue at the start that your brother says that you must follow the map that is buried inside. It was like, that's so perfect, that really sums it up. And there's like a couple of wee snippets like that just out of, or at least taken out of context and repurposed for this song. Like it really seemed to sort of fit and feel very nice.
And just because it was our history and looking back on our family, it just felt right to have something like that in there. And so yeah, it worked really well. When we put it in, we were like, oh, that sounds really nice. So it was good. Go visit Donegal if you're feeling sad. That's the moral of this story.
Just go jump in the Atlantic. Just rub your face in it and you'll feel better.
Yes.